Nous sommes soldats,
combattants
pour crier
sur le nom de Jésus, nous conquérons.
Nous sommes vaillants,
c'est
de la
parole au nom de Jésus, nous conquérons.
Nous sommes
vaillants,
cités à dessein
au nom de Jésus, nous conquérons.
Nous sommes vaillants, cités à dessein
au nom de Jésus, nous conquérons.
Quels qu'ils soient les effets,
nous conquérons. Au nom de Jésus, nous conquérons.
quels qu'ils soient les menaces,
nous conquérons. Au nom de Jésus, nous conquérons.
quels qu'ils soient les mensonges,
nous conquérons. Au nom de Jésus, nous conquérons.
quels qu'ils soient l'adversité,
Jésus, nous conquérons.
nous sommes vaillants, cités à dessein
au nom de Jésus, nous conquérons.
Nous sommes vaillants, cités à dessein
au nom de Jésus, nous conquérons.
Nous sommes vaillants, c'est de la parole
au nom de Jésus, nous conquérons.
Nous sommes vaillants, cités à dessein
au nom de Jésus, nous conquérons.
quels qu'ils soient les mensonges, quels qu'ils soient les menaces, quels qu'ils soient l'adversité, quelles que soient les persécutions, nous sommes vaillants, cités à dessein
au nom de Jésus, nous conquérons.
nous sommes vaillants, c'est de la parole
au nom de Jésus, nous conquérons.
nous sommes vaillants, cités à dessein
au nom de Jésus.
Prenez garde à vous-même, de crainte que vos cœurs ne s'appesantissent par les excès du manger et du boire et par les soucis de la vie, et que ce jour ne vienne sur vous à l'improviste. Car il viendra comme un filet sur tous ceux qui habitent sur la face de toute la terre. Veillez donc et priez en tout temps, afin que vous ayez la force d'échapper à toutes ces choses qui arriveront et de paraître debout devant le Fils de l'homme.
Et je vis sortir de la bouche du dragon, et de la bouche de la bête, et de la bouche du faux prophète, 3 esprits impurs, semblables à des grenouilles. Car ce sont des esprits de démons qui font des prodiges, et qui vont vers les rois de toute la terre, afin de les rassembler pour le combat du grand jour du Dieu Tout-Puissant. Ils les rassemblèrent dans le lieu appelé en hébreu Armageddon. Puis, je vis monter de la terre une autre bête, qui avait 2 cornes semblables à celles d'un agneau, et qui parlait comme un dragon. Elle exerçait toute l'autorité de la première bête en sa présence, et elle faisait que la terre et ses habitants adoraient la première bête, dont la blessure mortelle avait été guérie. Elle opérait de grands prodiges, même jusqu'à faire descendre du feu du ciel sur la terre, à la vue des hommes. Et elle séduisait les habitants de la terre par les prodiges qui lui étaient donnés d'opérer en présence de la bête, disant aux habitants de la terre de faire une image à la bête qui avait la blessure de l'épée et qui vivait. Et il lui fut donné d'animer l'image de la bête, afin que l'image de la bête parlât, et qu'elle fit que tous ceux qui n'adoreraient pas l'image de la bête fussent tués. Et elle fit que tous, petits et grands, riches et pauvres, libres et esclaves, reçussent une marque sur leur main droite ou sur leur front, et que personne ne put acheter ni vendre sans avoir la marque, le nom de la bête ou le nombre de son nom. C'est ici la sagesse. Que celui qui a de l'intelligence calcule le nombre de la bête, car c'est un nombre d'hommes, et son nombre, c'est 666.
A total of 9 people, and in a kind of research investigating the dust from the collapse on south of Manhattan. And in the dust we found what we characterize as unreacted thermitic material in the shape of some very tiny red-gray chips, which have different properties. Most importantly is they're still reacting, some of them, and in the reaction they produce molten iron, which is the prime indication of a thermitic reaction, and such a reaction can be used to destroy steel structures. Now, thermite is, in the old-fashioned thermite, is a mixture of pulverized aluminum and pulverized rust. And if you can get this mixture to react, which is not so easy, it produces tremendous heat, and this is what you call an incendiary. An incendiary is something which can be used to destroy something by the means of heat, while an explosive is something which acts with pressure. It knocks things apart. Now, the old-fashioned incendiary is not an explosive, but it is still used for military purposes for melting iron structures. What we have found is a modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite, which is produced in a different way. It is not just 2 powders being mixed. The material is actually built from the atom scale up. We call it the bottom-up procedure, which is what you do in nanotechnology. This has 2 consequences for the nanothermite, which distinguishes it from the classical thermite. First, the ingredients are much smaller, which means they are reacting faster and they are more easily ignited. 2, due to the process of producing nanothermite, you have the option of putting in other stuff, other chemicals, which converts the thermite reaction into an explosive reaction.
An example would be that in 1984 there was a patent issued for thermite cutter charges to be used in building demolitions that could shoot molten iron through the structural steel in milliseconds.
Oh my God! That was a bomb that did that.
Oh, fuck! Look at that!
That was a fucking bomb that did that. There's no goddamn way that could have happened.
God!
You can imagine when you assemble these chemicals on a large scale, the amount of heat that you generate.
Based on what you know, and I recognize we're dealing with so few facts, is it possible that just a plane crash could have collapsed these buildings, or would it have required the sort of prior positioning of other explosives in the building? What do you think?
No, my sense is that just one, the velocity of the plane and the fact that you have a plane filled with fuel hitting that building that burned, the velocity of the plane certainly had an impact on the structure itself, and then the fact that it burned and you had that intense heat probably weakened the structure as well. And I think it was simply the planes hitting the buildings and causing the collapse. My sense is that just one, the velocity of the plane and the fact that you have a plane filled with fuel hitting that building that burned, and you had that intense heat probably weakened the structure as well. As you can see, the impact on the rescue workers, I mean, these people who are heroes in this building that have been impacted by this, the number of people that have been injured, the number of police and fire officers, firefighters that have been injured is just, it's incalculable at this point.
Is it possible that just a plane crash could have collapsed these buildings, or would it have required the sort of prior positioning of other explosives in the building? What do you think?
No, my sense is that the fact that you have a plane filled with fuel that burned, the velocity of the plane certainly had an impact on the structure itself.
What perspective can you give us? I mean, there have been these repeated reports that, well, yes, Osama bin Laden, but some think he's been overemphasized as responsible for these kinds of events. I know many intelligence people at very high levels who say, listen, you can't have these kinds of attacks without having some state, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Syria, somebody involved. Put that into perspective for us.
Well, I'm not sure I agree that this is necessarily state-sponsored. It, as I mentioned earlier, certainly has the fingerprints of somebody like bin Laden.
You served as the commissioner for Mayor Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management.
He is always poised to strike again. Immensely wealthy man and a very private man. He has been granted a safe haven by Afghanistan's ruling Taliban movement. And during his time in hiding, he has called for a holy war against the United States and specifically for the killing of Americans and Jews. He is reported to be able to rally anywhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 fighters for his terrorist cause. He is suspected of helping set up an Islamic training center, in fact several of them, to prepare soldiers to fight in all parts of the world, in particular against the United States. He is always poised to strike again. Immensely wealthy man. And during his time in hiding, he has called for a holy war against the United States and specifically for the killing of Americans and Jews. He is reported to be able to rally anywhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 fighters for his terrorist cause. He is suspected of helping set up an Islamic training center, in fact several of them, to prepare soldiers to fight in all parts of the world, in particular against the United States. He is very elusive, moving from mud huts and tent cities and caves at least 3 times a week, taking other precautions. The U.S. tried at one point in time with satellite surveillance to launch an attack on one of his camps, hoping he was there. It turned out he was not.
Armed with knives, armed with chemical, biological, nuclear weapons. Fanatics, terrorists, September 11th. September 11th, killers, September 11th, terrorists. Terrorists of Al-Qaeda, terrorists, nuclear weapons, terrorists. 9/11, terror, terrorist, evil. September 11th, September 11th. The terrorists, war and danger. September 11th, terrorism, global terrorism, terrorism, terrorists. Terrorists, 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 the terror. Terrorists, terrorist, terrorism. September 11th, global terrorism, terrorists. Terrorism. September 11th, world terrorism, terrorism. September 11th, global terrorism. September the 11th, terror. Weapons of mass destruction. September the 11th, terrorists. The evil terrorists, no.
Then, who does Bush appoint? He appoints Henry Kissinger. Naming Kissinger sets a new standard for cynicism, or for being out of touch, or both. A New York Times editorial suggests the choice was to contain an investigation the White House long opposed. But Kissinger at least is an expert on the date September 11th. It was on that day in 1973 that the CIA-assisted overthrow of the democratically elected government of Chile takes place, masterminded by Kissinger for Richard Nixon. President Salvador Allende is murdered. After a universal backlash, Kissinger backs off. Bush then names, it's 431 days now, Thomas Kean and Lee Hamilton as co-chairman. Kane's Azerbaijan oil connections and other conflicts of interest should make him ineligible from the outset. He earlier co-chairs the Homeland Security Project. Observers have noted that huge profits are to be made in the surveillance and security industries these days. The White House chooses all the commissioners. Lynn calls them key insiders rife with conflicts of interest. The White House brazenly appoints as executive director one Dr. Philip Zelikow, a right-wing Republican hawk deeply involved in the Bush circle, a member of the Bush-Cheney transition team, and a National Security Council advisor with Condoleezza Rice under Bush 1. The Bush White House did everything in its power to derail an open inquiry. Then, when faced with its inevitability, the President and his aides sought to limit its scope, its access, and its funding. This commission was about as independent from White House control and manipulation as the abused prisoners at Abu Ghraib were from their jailers. The White House releases only 25% of 11,000 documents requested. It blacks out portions of the released documents, resists requests that the administration officials testify under oath, and tries to rush the commission's deadline. Bush and Cheney meet the commission. But it is behind closed doors. They refuse to testify under oath. No tape recorders are allowed. No transcript is allowed. Bush makes no opening statement, and those taking notes must submit them to security personnel.
My administration will not talk about how we gather intelligence, if we gather intelligence, and what the intelligence says. I will not discuss. We will not discuss.
Là, le Saint-Esprit ne sera plus sur la terre. En ce temps-là, il ne sera plus sur la terre. J'ai commencé à avoir un trafic énorme. J'ai commencé à avoir des accidents. Toutes les personnes qui étaient appelées avant, il me dit, ils chercheront la mort, mais la mort ne sera plus. La mort ne sera plus dans ce temps-là. Et précisément, j'ai commencé à voir que là, il y avait des personnes amères. J'ai commencé à voir comment circulaient des revues qui disaient « Des millions de personnes ont disparu ». Beaucoup de ceux qui savaient que Christ venait pour un peuple saint, et aussi ceux qui avaient connaissance de sa parole, pleuraient dans les rues. Il y en avait tant, mais ils ne pouvaient rien faire. Et le Seigneur ferma l'écran et il me dit, je viens là chercher un peuple saint. Je viens bientôt chercher mon Église. Veille sur ce que tu fais pour accomplir ce que je t'ai demandé. Dis à mon peuple que je reviens d'ici peu. Dis à mon peuple que je reviens déjà. Le Seigneur me dit, dis à mon peuple que je reviens déjà et que je viens pour un peuple saint. Dis à mon peuple que c'est seulement les saints, c'est seulement les saints qui me verront. Le temps est proche. Le Seigneur a permis de signaler et révéler à l'humanité ce qui arrivera. Aujourd'hui, c'est le temps du salut. Et que tu invites ta vie à ton unique sauveur, Jésus. Prends ce temps de choisir ta destinée. La vie ou la mort. Le ciel ou l'enfer. Jésus ou le diable. C'est très clair. D'appartenir à Dieu ou d'appartenir au diable. De faire le bien ou de faire le mal. Ton choix sera ta destinée. Vie éternelle ou étang de feu. Réfléchis. Fais le choix. Décide maintenant. Jésus-Christ est mort sur la croix pour chacun d'entre nous, pour nos péchés, et nous a donné l'opportunité d'être sauvés par sa miséricorde. Accepte Jésus comme ton unique sauveur. Tous l'ont écouté et l'ont vu. Que ce moment, vous le viviez comme un appel. Ne vous condamnez pas pour l'enfer éternel.